In this video, you will examine how an organization designs security operations, identity, and compliance capabilities. Let's start with an overview of the current environment of organization 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲. The current state of the customer's environment exemplifies the traditional on-premises approach to authentication, authorization, and identity management. 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲 is operating entirely on-premises. Since majority of its infrastructure is running Windows-based workloads, majority of servers are Active Directory domain joined. The Active Directory environment consists of a multi-domain forest with the domain controllers running Windows Server 2019 and the forest functional level set to Windows Server 2016. Majority of line of business applications are web-based. While some of them have been designed to support modern authentication, there are a few that rely on Kerberos to authenticate and authorize access to back-end resources. The existing on-premises-centric model impedes 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲's plans to expand their business through partnership with other financial institutions such as 𝐒𝐵𝐴𝐾𝐿 Banking, which has already integrated its AD/DS environment with Azure Active Directory or Azure AD. 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲 intends to provide 𝐒𝐵𝐴𝐾 Banking with access to its internal Windows-based web applications that could supplement the existing 𝐒𝐵𝐴𝐾 Banking products. Another challenge that 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲 struggles with is increased mobility of its workforce. To accommodate the shift driven by the rising real estate costs and the impact of pandemic, the company is planning to transition to a flexible work arrangement, allowing its employees to work remotely using corporate-owned or personal devices. The current operating model based on point-to-site VPN and direct access technologies is considered as a security risk by 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲's Information Security or InfoSec team and must be replaced by a strategic solution which would adhere to the Zero Trust principles. Let's now explore how 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲 plans to meet the various design requirements in its transition to a new security solutions. The first requirement is to ensure that remote users can sign into their devices using their Active Directory credentials without relying on VPN or direct access. The strategy formulated by 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲's Information Technology Management team that involves transitioning its operations into a more Internet open model is bound to facilitate support for mobile workforce and integration with business partners, while at the same time enhance the existing security controls. Considering the significant presence of Microsoft technologies in the current environment, choosing Azure AD as the foundation of the future architecture offers the optimal path for the planned transition. The choice of Azure AD will facilitate addressing the customer's requirements, including step-up authentication and per-application permissions based not only on the properties of users' accounts, but also on the state of these users' devices. It will also help with implementing a range of Zero Trust principles, including restricting persistent assignments of privileged roles for identity and access management, as well as monitoring, auditing, and reviewing the usage of privileged accounts. In addition, it will provide a straightforward path towards integration with business partners such as 𝐒𝐵𝐴𝐾 Banking. The first step in 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐲's transition to the cloud-first operational model is to provision an Azure AD tenant and integrate it with the on-premises Active Directory environment. Azure AD Join will enable remote users to join their devices to Azure AD. This integration supports hybrid environments, allowing access to both cloud and on-premises apps and resources. Users can sign in to Azure AD Join devices using their organizational Azure AD credentials, which are identical in both environments. Integration between AD/DS and Azure AD is implemented by using Azure AD Connect, which is an application you install on a Windows server with direct connectivity to AD/DS domain controllers and outbound access to Azure AD. The main component of Azure AD Connect is its synchronization service. Its purpose is to synchronize identity data between the two identity providers. Two other requirements are to enforce user sign-in hours and password policies, identify and remediate any password misuse or exposure events, and to simplify user sign-in experience by minimizing the number of sign-in prompts and limiting the use of passwords in lieu of more secure authentication methods. Aside from federation, which requires additional infrastructure, Azure AD Connect supports two authentication options. Password hash synchronization, or PHS, which replicates password hashes from AD/DS domains to the corresponding Azure AD tenant, allowing users to use the same credentials that they use on premises without having to deploy any additional infrastructure besides Azure AD Connect. Pass-through authentication, or PTA, which eliminates the need to replicate password hashes, but instead validates users' credentials by forwarding authentication requests from Azure AD to on-premises software agents with direct connectivity to AD/DS domain controllers. The on-premises agents request validation by contacting AD/DS domain controllers and, once the validation is completed, send responses back to Azure AD. The communication between the agents and Azure AD is initiated outbound, so it doesn't involve opening any inbound ports. The ability to enforce user sign-in hours and password policies defined in on-premises AD/DS domains when authenticating to Azure AD in hybrid scenarios is determined by authentication method setting of the Azure AD Connect component. This is one of the first decisions that Contoso needs to make when implementing Azure AD Connect. Authentication is critical because it will validate users' identities to access apps and data in the cloud. Contoso's requirement to enforce on-premises Active Directory user account restrictions, such as allowed sign-in hours, combined with the need to detect leaked passwords, dictates the choice of a hybrid authentication method. When using Azure AD Connect in hybrid scenarios, Contoso should implement PTA to ensure that on-premises AD user account sign-in hour restrictions are enforced in the cloud. However, Contoso should enable PHS to detect leaked passwords. Fortunately, these two options can be combined. Contoso can enable PHS while using PTA as the authentication method when configuring Azure AD Connect. Additionally, Azure AD's Seamless Single Sign-On, or SSO, can be combined with either the PHS or PTA sign-in methods. It simplifies cloud-based authentication for users signed in to their Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined devices connected to their corporate network. When enabled, users do not need to provide their passwords multiple times to access on-premises or cloud resources. It is important to note that Microsoft also offers Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, which uses a different approach while providing a subset of features of Azure AD Connect. When using Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, you install Azure AD Cloud Provisioning Agent on a Windows server with a direct connection to a domain controller. The synchronization service runs in Azure AD. However, since Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync currently does not support pass-through authentication, this option is not suitable for Contoso. Another requirement is to promptly identify and remedy password misuse or exposure in password-protected environments. With the newly provisioned Azure AD tenant in place, Contoso implements a number of features that enhance built-in tenant security. This starts with configuring Azure AD Identity Protection, enabling multi-factor authentication for the set of privileged accounts used for tenant administration, and implementing Azure AD Conditional Access. Identity Protection automates the detection and remediation of identity-based risks. It also facilitates investigating risks by providing access to the information it collects representing risky sign-ins and risk-related events. Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication and Conditional Access serve as the essential components of identity-based protection strategy, minimizing or eliminating the risk of phishing and password attacks. As users appear on new devices or from new locations, they will be forced to validate their identity based on the policies Contoso define. This approach should be supplemented by blocking legacy authentication for all access. In addition, 𝐒𝐞𝐲 implements Azure AD password protection, which detects and blocks known weak passwords and their variants, and can also block additional weak terms that are specific to your organization. On-premises deployment of Azure AD password protection uses the same global and custom banned password lists that are stored in Azure AD, and performs the same checks for on-premises password changes as Azure AD does for cloud-based changes. These checks take place during password changes and password reset events against on-premises Active Directory domain controllers. The next requirement is to enable designated IT staff to temporarily elevate privileges for delegated identity and resource management subject to approval, audit, and regular review of member list and privileges. In addition to features that complement built-in Azure AD authentication capabilities, 𝐒𝐞𝐲 also implement Azure AD Identity Governance, including Privileged Identity Management, or PIM. PIM facilitates the management, control, and monitoring of access to organizational assets. These assets include Azure AD applications, Azure resources, and other Microsoft online services, such as Microsoft 365 or Intune. PIM offers time-based and approval-based role activation to mitigate the risks of excessive, unnecessary, or misused access permissions on resources that you care about. Some of the key capabilities of PIM include providing just-in-time privileged access to Azure AD and Azure resources, assigning time-bound access to resources, requiring an approval to activate privileged roles, enforcing multi-factor authentication to activate any role, ensuring that a rationale is provided as part of the role activation request approval process, generating notifications when privileged roles are activated, triggering access reviews to validate whether users still need the ability to use roles, and maintaining audit history for internal or external audit. The next step in implementing our solution involves deploying Microsoft Defender for Identity, which is part of Microsoft 365 Defender product suite, in order to enhance security of 𝐒𝐞𝐲's on-premises AD/DS environment. By installing Defender for Identity sensors on the on-premises domain controllers, the customer will be able to identify, detect, and investigate advanced threats, compromised identities, and malicious insider actions targeting their digital assets. Defender for Identity will help 𝐒𝐞𝐲's security operations team to monitor users, entity behavior, and activities with learning-based analytics, protect user identities and credentials stored in Active Directory, identify and investigate suspicious user activities and advanced attacks throughout the kill chain, and provide clear incident information on a simple timeline for fast triage. With the relevant security services in place, 𝐒𝐞𝐲 provisions Azure AD identities by increasing the scope of synchronization of the Azure AD Connect to include Active Directory users and groups. All of the newly synchronized accounts are configured to use either multi-factor authentication or, whenever possible, passwordless authentication. Any external legacy authentication methods are disabled by leveraging conditional access policies. Another requirement is to control access to applications and resources with multiple conditional checks. In preparation for enrolling Windows devices of remote users into Microsoft Intune, 𝐒𝐞𝐲 implements Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Intune integrates with Defender for Endpoint, using it as its mobile threat defense solution. Integrating Intune with Defender for Endpoint will allow the customer to take advantage of the threat and vulnerability management functionality of Defender for Endpoints and use Intune to remediate detected vulnerabilities and threats. The next step involves enrolling remote devices into Intune. However, such enrollment requires that device objects exist in the Azure AD tenant. To accomplish this, the devices will be joined to Azure AD. In order to minimize administrative effort, 𝐒𝐞𝐲 enables automatic MDM enrollment in its Azure AD tenant. Intune provides means to enforce organization-defined device configurations, including disk encryption, software installations, and software updates. It also includes support for a wide range of policies that help apply and evaluate device compliance. In addition, Azure AD Join combined with Intune enrollment offers the ability to implement device-based conditional access policies. For example, 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐿 will be able to allow cloud applications access only to users signed in to compliant Azure AD or hybrid Azure AD Join devices. Device compliance is to be determined by Intune policies controlled by the InfoSec team. In preparation for transitioning some of on-premises web applications to Azure AD, 𝐒𝐞𝐜𝐿 implements Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. This will deliver benefits associated with the integration between Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps and Defender for Endpoint. The integration between Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps provides user entity behavioral analytics across a hybrid environment for both cloud and on-premises apps. The Security Operations team will be able to use Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps to track on-premises activities for all 𝐒𝐞𝐿 users. They will also gain access to advanced insights into their users' behavior through a combined view of alerts and suspicious activities across the cloud and on-premises environments. The integration with Defender for Endpoint will provide the ability to conduct cybersecurity investigations across activities and identities, delivering more insights into suspicious activities running in a user security context. The next requirement is to provide 𝐒𝐞𝐿's remote users with access to on-premises Windows-based applications that rely on Kerberos authentication. At this point, 𝐒𝐞𝐿 is ready to register web apps which support modern authentication in their Azure AD tenant. These apps will be available to remote users from the My Apps portal. To allow access to on-premises applications that rely on Kerberos to authenticate and authorize access to back-end resources, 𝐒𝐞𝐿 implements Azure AD Application Proxy. After a single sign-on to Azure AD, remote users will be able to access both cloud and on-premises applications through the My Apps portal. Effectively, users can access the on-premises applications the same way they access Microsoft 365 and other SaaS apps integrated with Azure AD. There is no need to change or update the existing applications to work with Application Proxy. In addition, on-premises applications benefit from Azure AD-based authorization controls and security analytics. For example, access to on-premises applications can be controlled by conditional access and two-step verification. Application Proxy doesn't require opening inbound connections on the edge firewalls of the corporate network. At this point, remote users no longer need to rely on VPN connections to access their applications, which addresses the concerns of 𝐒𝐞𝐿's InfoSec team. The final requirement is to provide Fabricam banking users secure and delegated access to on-premises and cloud applications. The same mechanism can be used to provide access to cloud and on-premises applications to Fabricam banking users. This can be done once they are invited as guests to the 𝐒𝐞𝐿 tenant. Their access can be provided by leveraging Azure AD Entitlement Management, which supports both internal and external users. Entitlement management will allow 𝐒𝐞𝐿 to control who can get access to web applications with multi-stage approvals, ensure that internal and external users don't retain access indefinitely by relying on time-limited assignments and recurring access reviews. Automate access assignments based on users' properties, such as department or cost center, and automatically revoking access when those properties change. Delegate to non-administrative users the ability to create access packages containing resources that other users can request with policies that determine eligible users, approvers, and access expiration behavior. Select Fabricam banking users that can request access to internal applications. When Fabricam banking users without guest accounts in the 𝐒𝐞𝐿 tenant request access and that request is approved, they will be automatically invited into the 𝐒𝐞𝐿 tenant and assigned access. When their access expires, if they have no other access package assignments, their guest accounts in the Contoso tenant can be automatically removed. These solutions together will help design security operations, identity, and compliance capabilities for the organization.